Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will discover 25 gentle Buddhist tales that hold the timeless keys to complete mental relaxation and inner peace. Teachings that have guided seekers to tranquility for over 1,000 years. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm about to share with you a rare collection of soothing wisdom that reveals the most treasured secrets of the ancient masters. Each gentle tale contains a peaceful teaching that can beautifully transform how you experience worry, restlessness, and the endless cycles of thought that keep you awake at night. These aren't simple stories to pass the time. They're quietly preserved lessons from enlightened teachers who discovered something extraordinary. That complete mental relaxation comes not from silencing the world around us, but from understanding the true nature of our own minds. The Buddha taught us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Tonight, you'll discover exactly what this timeless truth means for your own journey to complete mental relaxation. As we move through these gentle teachings, you'll feel something profound begin to unfold. The weight of your concerns will start to dissolve. The restless energy that keeps you turning will begin to settle. You'll find yourself naturally drifting into a state of profound clarity and peaceful mental relaxation. So allow yourself to sink deeply now. Let your entire being relax into whatever holds you. Take one mindful breath with me, and as you release it, know that you're about to receive ancient wisdom that has been patiently waiting to guide you home to yourself. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fluid nature of circumstances and the wisdom of withholding judgment. This is the tale of an old farmer and the art of living with uncertainty. In a remote valley surrounded by rolling mountains, an elderly farmer lives with his adult son in a simple farmhouse that has sheltered their family for generations. Their life is modest but sufficient, sustained by a small plot of vegetables and their most valuable possession, a strong, reliable horse that helps with all the heavy work of farming and transportation. One morning, the farmer awakens to discover that the horse has disappeared during the night. The gate stands open, and there are no tracks indicating theft. The animal has simply wandered off into the vast wilderness beyond their valley. For a farming family, losing their only horse represents a catastrophic setback that threatens their livelihood and survival. Word of this misfortune spreads quickly through their small community. By afternoon, neighbors begin arriving to express their sympathy and support. "Oh, how terrible this is for you," they exclaim with genuine concern. "What dreadful luck! How will you manage the farm without your horse? This is truly a disaster." The old farmer listens to their well-meaning condolences with calm attention, then responds simply, "How do you know this is bad luck?" His neighbors exchange puzzled glances. Surely the loss of such an essential animal is obviously unfortunate. But the old man's serene expression reveals no trace of the distress they expect to see. He continues with his daily activities as if nothing particularly significant has occurred. The next morning brings an extraordinary development. The missing horse returns, not alone, but followed by a small herd of wild horses, magnificent, powerful animals that have chosen to follow the domestic horse back to the farm. The farmer and his son quickly construct temporary fencing to contain this unexpected windfall. The same neighbors who had offered sympathy now rush over to share in the celebration. "What incredible good fortune," they declare with excitement. "You've gone from having one horse to owning an entire herd. This is the best luck anyone could imagine. You must be overjoyed by this blessing. Again, the old farmer listens thoughtfully to their enthusiastic congratulations before responding with the same calm curiosity. How do you know this is good luck? The following day, the farmer's son attempts to break one of the wild horses for riding. These animals, though beautiful, have never known human handling and resist fiercely. During the training session, the young man is thrown violently from the horse's back and suffers a severe break in his leg that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. Once more, the neighbors gather to offer their support in what appears to be another turn toward misfortune. How dreadful, they lament, shaking their heads at this latest setback. Just when things were looking so positive, this terrible accident happens. Your poor son, what bad luck has befallen your family again? The old farmer tends to his son's injury with gentle care while responding to their expressions of sympathy with familiar words. How do you know this is bad luck? Within days, their question finds an unexpected answer. Military officers arrive in the valley with orders to conscript all able-bodied young men for a dangerous war against northern invaders. Most of these soldiers will not return home alive. However, when they examine the farmer's son, his broken leg makes him unsuitable for military service. He remains safely at home while other families say goodbye to their children, perhaps forever. The Buddha taught, every blessing ignored becomes a curse. Every curse faced becomes a blessing. What emerges from this story is the profound wisdom of holding our judgments about circumstances lightly, recognizing that our perspective is always partial and temporary. Why do we rush to label experiences as fortunate or unfortunate when their ultimate meaning remains unknown? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds seek the comfort of quick categorization, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. We want to know immediately whether to celebrate or mourn, to relax or worry, to feel grateful or resentful. This mental habit of instant evaluation reflects a deeper pattern of trying to control our emotional responses by controlling our interpretations of events. If we can quickly determine that something is good or bad, we believe we know how to feel and what to expect. This provides temporary psychological relief, but often proves premature and misleading. The old farmer's repeated question, "How do you know?" points to what Buddhist philosophy calls "don't know mind." This isn't ignorance, but wisdom, the recognition that reality unfolds in ways too complex and interconnected for our limited perspective to fully comprehend. What appears devastating in the moment may prove beneficial over time, while apparent blessings may carry hidden difficulties. Consider how many experiences in your own life have changed meaning as their consequences became clear. Perhaps a job rejection led to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending created space for personal growth. Possibly an illness brought unexpected insights about what truly matters. The disappointment you felt at the time now seems misplaced given what followed. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or stop having natural responses to events. The farmer certainly wanted his horse back and felt concern for his son's injury, but he distinguished between acknowledging immediate circumstances and creating elaborate stories about their ultimate significance. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught about beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh openness rather than predetermined assumptions about its meaning. When we practice this kind of mental flexibility, we become more resilient and responsive to changing conditions rather than rigid and reactive. The art of living that this story illustrates involves developing what Buddhists call equanimity. the capacity to remain present and responsive, regardless of whether circumstances align with our preferences. This isn't passive resignation, but dynamic engagement, without attachment to specific outcomes. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the experience, instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means for our future happiness or security. When we can rest in not knowing, we often discover that our wisdom about how to respond emerges naturally from the situation itself. The farmer's approach also demonstrates tremendous faith, not in specific outcomes, but in the fundamental trustworthiness of life's process. He acts skillfully with whatever arises while remaining open to possibilities beyond his current understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on recent events you've labeled as fortunate or unfortunate, can you hold those judgments more lightly? Perhaps you'll discover that your peace of mind depends less on having good luck and more on developing the capacity to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. As the Buddha observed, everything changes, nothing remains without change. This includes our interpretations of whether those changes serve our deepest welfare. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the prerequisite for all learning. This story unfolds in the elegant receiving room of a great Zen master's monastery, where a young scholar arrives seeking wisdom. The afternoon light filters softly through rice paper screens as an earnest young man approaches the Zen master's dwelling. This seeker has spent years accumulating knowledge, studying philosophical texts, memorizing spiritual concepts, and debating religious ideas with other learned individuals. His mind brims with theories about enlightenment, quotes from sacred texts, and sophisticated interpretations of ancient teachings. He has come to request instruction in the ways of Zen, confident that his extensive preparation has made him ready for advanced teachings. The Zen master welcomes him warmly and invites him to sit on a simple cushion beside a low wooden table. Without speaking about Zen or enlightenment, the master begins preparing tea with graceful, deliberate movements. Each gesture carries a quality of complete attention as he arranges the ceramic cups, measures the tea leaves, and heats the water to the precise temperature. The young scholar watches somewhat impatiently, eager to discuss profound spiritual matters rather than observe this mundane tea preparation. Surely someone of his sophistication deserves more substantial instruction than watching an old man make tea. The master places an elegant cup before his guest and begins to pour the steaming tea with steady precision. The golden liquid fills the cup to its brim, but the master continues pouring. The tea overflows onto the saucer, then onto the table, and finally begins dripping onto the floor. Still, the master continues pouring. Unable to contain himself any longer, the young man exclaims, "Master, the cup is full! It cannot hold any more tea!" The Zen master sets down the teapot and looks directly into the scholar's eyes. "Indeed," he says quietly, "this cup is like your mind. It is already full. How can I teach you anything about Zen when there is no room in your understanding for new insights? First, empty your cup. Then we can begin." As the Buddha observed, an empty cup can be filled with fresh tea. What emerges from this story is the essential quality of beginner's mind, or shoshin in Japanese, that makes all genuine learning possible. Why do we struggle to maintain the openness that allows new understanding to enter our awareness? Buddhist psychology explains that our accumulated knowledge, opinions, and conceptual frameworks can become barriers to direct experience. When we approach any situation convinced we already know what it contains, we filter everything through our existing beliefs rather than meeting it freshly. This mental fullness operates much more subtly than obvious arrogance. We might consider ourselves humble while still carrying unconscious assumptions about how spiritual practice should unfold, what enlightenment should feel like, or how awakened people should behave. These preconceptions create a kind of spiritual static that interferes with clear perception. The Buddha said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Shunryu Suzuki expanded this teaching, explaining that beginner's mind includes both the wonder that comes from not knowing and the courage to not know. This isn't ignorance, but wise innocence. The willingness to meet each moment without imposing yesterday's understanding upon it. Consider how your accumulated spiritual knowledge might sometimes interfere with direct experience. Perhaps you've read about mindfulness in ways that create expectations about what present moment awareness should feel like. Maybe you've heard descriptions of peace that prevent you from accepting the particular quality of calm available right now. Our concepts about enlightenment can become obstacles to recognizing the enlightenment that's already present. Zen Master Bankei taught his students about the unborn mind that exists before thoughts, concepts, and learned behaviors shape our perception. This original awareness doesn't need to be created through practice. It only needs to be recognized beneath the accumulation of mental content. But recognition requires the humility to not know, even about our most treasured insights. The practice of emptying our cup happens moment by moment. Each time we notice ourselves rushing to conclusions, defending positions, or filtering experience through familiar categories, we can pause and ask, what would I see if I didn't already know what this is? This beginner's mind applies not only to spiritual matters, but to every encounter with life. What would it mean to approach your partner as if meeting them for the first time? How might your work transform if you brought fresh curiosity to familiar tasks? What would become possible if you released your suppositions about your own limitations and capabilities? Tonight, as you rest in these moments before sleep, can you empty your cup of the day's accumulated judgments and interpretations? Perhaps you'll discover that not knowing creates space for a deeper kind of knowing to emerge, one that comes not from the mind but from the heart's direct recognition of truth. As the Buddha taught, the wise find pleasure in the truth. This truth reveals itself most clearly to minds humble enough to remain empty, ready to be filled with each moment's unique teaching. Let us now turn to a tale of profound simplicity and mysterious contentment. This is the stone robe. In the mountains near the great teacher Hakuin's temple lived a monk whose real name has been lost to history. The local villagers knew him only as the stone robe monk, a title that spoke to both his poverty and his ingenious adaptation to life's challenges. This solitary master owned virtually nothing. His hut contained no furniture, no decorations, no comforts of any kind. Most remarkably, he possessed no robe, an almost unthinkable condition for a Buddhist monk. Where other monks wore flowing robes that marked their status and provided warmth, the stone robe monk wrapped only his own skin against the elements. On the coldest mountain nights, when frost covered the ground and wind howled through the peaks, the monk had devised a unique solution. He would pick up a heavy stone and carry it around his small hut. walking in slow, deliberate circles until the effort of carrying the rock generated enough body heat to warm him. Round and round he would pace, the stone tight against his chest, his breath visible in the frigid air, until warmth spread through his limbs. The villagers who occasionally glimpsed him during these midnight walks were both puzzled and moved by the sight. Here was a man who had found a way to transform the very hardship of his poverty into a practice. The stone that others might see as a burden became his provider of comfort. The cold that might drive others to despair became an opportunity for simple, effective action. From time to time, the stone-robed monk would visit Master Hakuin, appearing at the temple like a figure from another era. The two masters would sit together, sharing the wordless communication that flows between those who have touched the deepest truths. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, the stone-robed monk would disappear back into the mountains. One day, he simply vanished entirely. No one knows where he went or how he died. But the stone he carried on those cold nights still sits in front of his abandoned hut, weathered by countless seasons, a silent testament to a life lived with extraordinary contentment in the face of extraordinary simplicity. The Buddha understood that health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. The deeper teaching here shows us that true wealth has nothing to do with material possession and everything to do with our relationship to whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. Why do we struggle to find contentment with simplicity? Our conditioning teaches us that comfort must come from external sources: warmer clothes, better shelter, more possessions, improved circumstances. The stone-robed monk discovered something radically different. That resourcefulness born from acceptance can transform any limitation into workable wisdom. This tale unveils the profound difference between poverty of spirit and voluntary simplicity. Poverty of spirit involves feeling victimized by our circumstances, resentful of what we lack, constantly comparing our situation to others who have more. Voluntary simplicity, even when circumstances are difficult, involves a fundamental acceptance that finds creative ways to meet challenges without complaint or self-pity. The stone in this story represents what Zen calls skillful means, the creative adaptation that emerges when we stop arguing with reality and start working with it. Instead of lamenting his lack of a warm robe, the monk found another way to generate warmth. Instead of viewing the stone as an inconvenience, he recognized it as a resource. This is the genius of acceptance. It frees our creative energy from resistance and channeling it toward practical solutions. Consider the stones in your own life, the limitations, inconveniences, or challenges that you might habitually resist. What would shift if you approached these not as problems to be solved or obstacles to be overcome, but as raw materials for creative adaptation? How might a traffic jam become an opportunity for breathing practice, or a small living space become a chance to discover the freedom of owning less? Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. The stone-robed monk embodied this forgetting. He lived so fully present to what was needed in each moment that there was no energy left over for self-pity or comparison with others. His contentment arose not from having his needs met in conventional ways, but from the joy of meeting them creatively. The mystery of his disappearance adds another dimension to the teaching. Like all authentic spiritual presence, his impact was felt not through permanence, but through the quality of his being. He left no teachings, founded no school, attracted no permanent students. Yet the stone remains, inviting anyone who encounters it to contemplate the possibility of profound contentment within the simplest circumstances. Tonight, as you rest in whatever comfort or discomfort surrounds you, can you sense the stone-robed monk's spirit? Can you feel the possibility of finding warmth not through acquiring more, but through fully embracing what is already present? As the Buddha taught, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The stone waits patiently to teach us that true wealth lies in our capacity to find creative contentment with whatever life provides. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of presence and the boundaries we create between availability and solitude. This is Out Today. Master Sengai had developed an unusual habit that both puzzled and amused his community. On certain days, without any apparent pattern or warning, he would close the wooden gate to his temple quarters and paste upon it a simple handwritten sign that read, "Out Today." Yet anyone passing by could clearly see him through the spaces in the fence, walking peacefully back and forth in his front garden, tending to his plants, sitting in meditation, or simply enjoying the afternoon sunshine. The master made no effort to hide his presence. He moved about his daily activities with complete naturalness, watering flowers, sweeping leaves, or reading beneath his favorite tree. To any observer, he was obviously at home and available, making the sign's message seem like either a joke or a contradiction. One afternoon, a samurai official who had long been acquainted with the master happened to pass by the temple. Noticing Sengai clearly visible in his garden, the official approached the gate with a friendly smile and called out, "Your Reverence, I haven't seen you in some time. How have you been? I was hoping we might have a conversation." Master Sengai looked up from the chrysanthemums he was arranging and simply pointed to the sign posted prominently on his gate. "Please read what it says," he replied matter-of-factly. The samurai, increasingly confused, gestured toward the master with obvious bewilderment. "But Your Reverence, you're clearly here, aren't you? I can see you right there in front of me. You must just be kidding around." Sengai dismissed him with a gentle wave of his hand, his expression remaining perfectly serious. "That sign says I'm out. It's as true as anything can be." And with that declaration, he turned his attention back to his flowers, refusing any further conversation. The samurai stood at the gate for several more minutes, watching the master continue his gardening, trying to comprehend this strange interaction. Finally, shaking his head in confusion, he departed, leaving Master Sengai to his peculiar form of absence. As the Buddha understood, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This teaching relates profoundly to our modern struggle with the boundaries between availability and inner sanctuary, between social obligation and spiritual necessity. Why do we find it so difficult to establish clear boundaries around our inner availability, even when we are physically present? This story unveils our complex relationship with accessibility and the guilt we often feel about not being constantly available to others' needs and expectations. In our hyper-connected world, the pressure to be perpetually accessible has become overwhelming. Our phones buzz with constant demands for attention. Our email inboxes fill with urgent requests. Social media creates an expectation of immediate response and continuous engagement. We have lost the ancient wisdom of knowing when to be present and when to be out, regardless of our physical location. Master Sengai understood something profound about the nature of true availability. Being physically present doesn't automatically mean being internally available for meaningful interaction. Sometimes we need to be out from social engagement in order to be fully in with our inner work, our spiritual practice, or simply the restoration of our authentic self. This teaching also reveals our tendency to confuse physical presence with emotional or spiritual accessibility. How often do we assume that because someone is visible, they should automatically be available for our needs? How frequently do we ignore others' subtle signals that they need space simply because they haven't erected obvious barriers? Zen Master Yunmen taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is appropriate for the same activities or interactions. Some days are good for engagement, others for solitude. Some moments call for availability, others for protective boundaries. Wisdom lies in recognizing which is needed when. We can observe this dynamic in countless modern situations. The parent who loves their children deeply but recognizes they need an hour of uninterrupted quiet time to remain emotionally available later. The artist who must protect their creative space from well-meaning friends who don't understand the delicate nature of inspiration. The spiritual practitioner who needs to establish boundaries around their meditation time, even if others consider it selfish or antisocial. The samurai's confusion reflects our cultural discomfort with boundaries that aren't immediately logical or convenient for others. We want people's availability to match our schedules and needs, rather than their own inner rhythms and requirements. When someone establishes a boundary that doesn't make sense to us, we often assume they're being arbitrary, unfriendly, or deceptive. This ancient wisdom illuminates another important distinction: the difference between isolation and conscious solitude. Master Sengai wasn't hiding from life or avoiding responsibility. He was claiming his right to be present with himself, to engage with his immediate environment, without the overlay of social interaction and conversation. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that availability is a moral obligation rather than a conscious choice. We feel guilty for not being constantly accessible, as if our worth depends on our willingness to interrupt our own needs for others' convenience. This creates a pattern of resentment and depletion that ultimately makes us less genuinely available when authentic connection is possible. The story also points us toward understanding the power of clear, simple boundaries. Master Sengai didn't offer elaborate explanations or justifications for his unavailability. He didn't apologize or make excuses. He simply stated a fact. Today he was out from social engagement, and this was as true and valid as any other truth. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with availability and boundaries, can you identify times when you might need to be out, even while physically present? What would it mean to honor your inner rhythms of engagement and solitude without guilt or extensive justification? The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Part of this self-love involves knowing when to be available to others and when to be available to yourself, trusting that both forms of presence serve the greater good. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement? Or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision? Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others. Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Now let us turn to a tale about the intoxication of worldly status and the humility that true wisdom brings. This is the teacher of the high priest. In feudal Japan, a certain Zen priest had risen to great prominence within his religious order. As the high priest of his sect, he enjoyed the patronage of a powerful provincial baron and lived accordingly. When duty called him to the capital, he traveled in magnificent style, carried in an ornate palanquin surrounded by a retinue of attendants, his procession announcing his importance to all who witnessed it. On one such journey, the entourage stopped at a roadside way station to rest and refresh themselves. The horses needed new shoes, and the riders required fresh footwear for the remaining distance. A local porter recommended an old craftsman known for making exceptional straw sandals, and the man was summoned to provide his services. As the elderly sandal maker approached with his humble wares, the high priest glanced through his palanquin window and nearly collapsed in shock. The weathered face belonged to Tosui, the enlightened Zen master, who had been his own teacher years earlier, before mysteriously vanishing from the temple without explanation. Tumbling from his luxurious carriage in embarrassment and amazement, the high priest prostrated himself before the old man, paying his respects with elaborate courtesy, befitting a student greeting his former master. The retinue watched in bewilderment as their dignified leader bowed deeply to a simple craftsman. Tosui received his former student's greetings with gentle kindness, speaking warmly of their shared memories and inquiring about his spiritual progress. They talked of old times and mutual friends, the master treating the encounter as a pleasant reunion between old companions. As they prepared to part ways, Tosui looked directly into his former student's eyes and spoke quietly, so only the priest could hear. Don't let yourself become intoxicated by association with nobles. The company of powerful people can be more dangerous to spiritual development than the strongest wine. The high priest received these words like arrows piercing his heart, recognizing the profound warning they contained. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, it is better to travel alone than with a bad companion. Be like the elephant who walks alone in the forest. The deeper teaching here shows us how external status and prestigious associations can corrupt our spiritual development in ways we rarely recognize. Why do we become intoxicated by proximity to power and status? Zen teachings illuminate several subtle ways this happens. When we associate with influential people, we begin to identify with their power, rather than cultivating our own inner strength. Like absorbing secondhand smoke, we breathe in their sense of importance until we mistake it for our own spiritual development. We also become attached to the privileges that come with high status, the comfortable accommodations, respectful treatment, and social recognition. These comforts gradually erode our willingness to embrace the simplicity and humility that genuine spiritual growth requires. We start believing we deserve special treatment because of our position, rather than earning respect through wisdom and compassion. Additionally, Prestigious associations can seduce us into spiritual pride, the most dangerous of all spiritual obstacles. We begin to think of ourselves as important because important people seek our company. This pride creates a barrier between us and the ordinary people whose suffering we're meant to serve, and between us and the beginner's mind that remains open to learning. Consider how this pattern manifests in contemporary life. Religious leaders might become more concerned with maintaining relationships with wealthy donors than serving their community's spiritual needs. Spiritual teachers could focus more on attracting celebrity students than on their own practice. Even meditation practitioners might pursue advanced techniques to impress others, rather than cultivating basic mindfulness and compassion. The Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we become intoxicated by external status, we move in the opposite direction, studying how others perceive us, rather than understanding our true nature. Tosui's choice to become a simple sandal maker demonstrates profound wisdom. After achieving recognition as an enlightened master, he deliberately chose obscurity, returning to basics and serving others in the most humble way possible. This wasn't escapism, but a return to what matters most, reducing suffering through simple, direct service. His warning to his former student reveals deep understanding of how spiritual development actually works. True realization makes us more humble, not more important. Genuine wisdom increases our compassion for ordinary people rather than elevating us above them. Authentic awakening dissolves the ego rather than inflating it with prestigious associations. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." When we seek status and recognition, we're trying to gather light rather than become light ourselves. When we serve humbly like Tosui, we illuminate others without concern for our own brightness. Notice how different these two approaches feel in your own life. When do you feel most spiritually alive? When others are impressed by your knowledge and status, or when you're simply present and helpful without anyone noticing? Which moments bring deeper peace? Being recognized for your spiritual achievements, or quietly serving someone who needs assistance? Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual journey, can you identify areas where you might be intoxicated by external recognition rather than focused on inner development? What would it mean to choose the sandal maker's path over the high priest's procession in your own circumstances? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. True spiritual status comes not from the company we keep, but from the love we cultivate. Let us explore a story that takes place in a tranquil temple nestled in the northern mountains of Japan, where autumn painted the world in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. This is the story of a garden and a Zen master. The crisp autumn air carries the sound of rustling leaves as a senior monk moves methodically through the temple courtyard. With careful precision, he gathers the fallen leaves beneath the ancient maple tree that has watched over this sacred space for centuries. Each sweep of his bamboo rake creates perfect lines in the gravel, and soon he has assembled a magnificent pile of leaves, their colors still vibrant despite their journey to the earth. The monk works with quiet satisfaction, placing the leaves carefully into woven baskets, his movements graceful and purposeful. From beyond the temple wall, another figure watches this scene unfold. A Zen master from a neighboring monastery observes the monk's diligent work, his weathered face thoughtful. When the senior monk notices his presence and waves proudly toward his immaculate garden, calling out cheerfully, "It is good, isn't it?" The Zen master simply nods and says, "Just about. Wait a moment. I'm coming over." The senior monk watches curiously as the Zen master enters through the wooden gate, walks directly to the ancient tree, and without ceremony gives its trunk a vigorous shake. Immediately, countless leaves cascade down like golden rain, covering the pristine garden once again in nature's beautiful disorder. The Zen master dusts off his hands and says simply, "Now it is good," before departing as quietly as he arrived. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound teaching about attachment to outcomes and the ego's need for completion. Why do we become so invested in finished results, in tidy conclusions, in maintaining the illusion of control over impermanence? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that trap us in outcome obsession. We often measure our worth by external achievements, rather than the quality of presence we bring to each action. The senior monk had moved from mindful raking to prideful display, from being present with the process to identifying with the product. Consider how often throughout your day you rush through activities simply to reach their completion. Washing dishes becomes about having clean dishes rather than the warm water on your hands. Exercise becomes about burning calories rather than feeling your body move. Meditation becomes about achieving peace rather than witnessing whatever arises. In each case, we sacrifice the richness of the present moment for an imagined future satisfaction. Zen Master Dogen taught, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This seeming paradox points to the delicate balance between accepting what is while remaining open to continuous becoming. The garden was perfect in its autumn disorder, and it was also perfect in its temporary tidiness. Both states were fleeting expressions of natural flow. The deeper teaching here shows us that true spiritual practice lies not in achieving permanent states, but in developing the capacity to engage wholeheartedly with whatever work is before us. Whether gathering leaves or watching them fall, the quality of our attention matters more than the condition of our garden. When we cling to outcomes, we miss the sacred nature of process itself. This ancient wisdom challenges our productivity-obsessed culture that values completion over presence. What if the purpose of raking leaves isn't to have a tidy garden, but to practice wholehearted engagement with impermanence? What if the point of any spiritual practice isn't to achieve enlightenment, but to show up fully for this unrepeatable moment? Tonight, as you notice your attachment to having things finished, organized, or resolved, can you pause and appreciate the beauty of incompletion? Perhaps you'll discover that the most profound satisfaction comes not from achieving perfect results, but from offering perfect attention to whatever is arising now. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When we think we must control outcomes, we become anxious controllers. When we trust the wisdom of process, we become participants in life's deeper rhythms. Let us now turn to a story about generosity in the face of poverty and the profound recognition of what truly cannot be stolen. This is the moon in the window. Master Ryokan lived in conditions of voluntary simplicity that would have challenged even the most committed ascetic. His small mountain hut contained virtually no possessions, no treasures, no valuable objects, no accumulations of any kind that might tempt a thief or provide security for the future. His few belongings consisted only of the most basic necessities: worn robes, simple eating utensils, and perhaps a book or two for contemplation. On this particular evening, as Master Ryokan rested peacefully in his humble dwelling, a sneak thief approached through the darkness, believing he had found an easy target in what appeared to be an unguarded dwelling. The thief moved carefully, avoiding any sounds that might alert the occupant to his presence, and managed to slip inside the hut undetected. Once inside, however, the burglar quickly discovered the reality of the master's lifestyle. He searched methodically through the small space, examining every corner and crevice where valuables might be hidden, but found absolutely nothing worth stealing. There were no coins, no jewelry, no fine fabrics, no tools of value, nothing that could be easily carried away and converted into money or traded for necessities. The thief stood in the middle of the sparse room, frustrated and disappointed by this complete lack of anything worth taking. He had risked detection and potential punishment for what appeared to be a completely fruitless endeavor. After investing time and effort in this nocturnal enterprise, he was faced with the prospect of returning home empty-handed, with nothing to show for his criminal efforts. Just as the discouraged thief was preparing to leave in defeat, Master Ryokan's voice emerged gently from the darkness. Rather than shouting for help or expressing anger at this intrusion into his privacy, the master spoke with the kind of compassionate concern he might show toward any guest who was experiencing difficulty. "Wait," the master called softly. "Don't leave yet." The thief froze, expecting to be confronted, accused, or perhaps threatened with consequences for his attempted burglary. Instead, he watched in amazement as Master Ryokan quietly rose from his sleeping area and began removing the old cotton-quilted bedclothes that provided his warmth during the cool mountain nights. Without a word of reproach or any indication that he considered this intrusion a violation, the master folded his bedding carefully and offered it to the bewildered thief. "Here," he said simply. "Take this. You've come all this way and deserve something for your trouble." The thief accepted the unexpected gift in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to such extraordinary generosity from someone he had intended to rob. This was unlike any encounter with a victim he had ever experienced. The master's kindness left him speechless and somehow ashamed of his original intentions. As the confused burglar departed with the master's bedding, Master Ryokan stood in his doorway and noticed that the moon had risen over the eastern mountains, casting its serene light across the landscape. The beauty of this sight inspired him to compose a traditional waka poem that captured both his physical situation and his spiritual understanding. Left untouched by the thief in his haste, the moon in the window. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils a teaching about the difference between material wealth and true abundance, and the recognition that our deepest treasures cannot be taken by any external force. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with possession, security, and the fear of loss that dominates so much of human experience. Master Ryokan's response to the thief reveals someone who understood that genuine wealth consists not in what we accumulate, but in our capacity for generosity, compassion, and appreciation of beauty that requires no ownership. The master's immediate impulse to give something to the disappointed thief demonstrates a revolutionary understanding of abundance. Rather than feeling victimized by someone who had tried to take from him, he experienced concern for someone who seemed to be in need. His poverty became a source of generosity rather than a reason for defensiveness or fear. Why do we typically respond to attempted theft with anger, outrage, and desire for punishment rather than compassion for the thief's desperation? This reaction stems from our identification with our possessions as extensions of ourselves, and our belief that being robbed somehow diminishes our worth or security. But Master Ryokan's response suggests a different relationship with material goods, one based on stewardship rather than attachment. His poem about the moon reveals the profound teaching at the heart of this story. The thief could take material objects, but could never steal the master's appreciation of beauty, his capacity for wonder, his ability to find joy in simple, natural phenomena. These internal treasures, peace, contentment, aesthetic sensitivity, remain completely beyond the reach of any external threat. The image of the moon in the window represents all the gifts that life offers freely to anyone with eyes to see them: beauty, mystery, natural wonder, and the kind of wealth that increases rather than decreases when shared. The thief left with fabric that would eventually wear out, but the master retained access to beauty that would never diminish, and joy that no one could take away. This teaching reveals the difference between having and being. Material possessions require constant protection, can be lost or stolen, and often create more anxiety than genuine security. But the qualities of consciousness that Master Ryokan embodied, generosity, peace, appreciation, become stronger through expression rather than weaker through sharing. We can observe similar dynamics in our own relationship with loss and theft. When someone takes something from us, do we focus primarily on what we've lost, or on our capacity to respond with wisdom and compassion? Can we recognize opportunities to practice generosity even in situations that initially seem to call for defensive reactions? The story also points us toward understanding true security. Master Ryokan felt safe not because he had elaborate locks or security systems, but because he had nothing worth stealing in conventional terms and everything worth having in spiritual terms. His security came from inner abundance rather than external accumulation. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-possessive appreciation, the ability to enjoy beauty and goodness without needing to own or control them. When we can appreciate the moon without needing to possess it, we access a form of wealth that no economic conditions can threaten. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that voluntary simplicity means deprivation or sacrifice. But Master Ryokan's story suggests the opposite, that reducing our attachment to material accumulation can actually increase our access to the forms of wealth that truly matter. His poverty became a gateway to generosity rather than a limitation on his capacity to give. The thief's hasty departure suggests that he recognized something in the master's response that challenged his entire framework for understanding value and security. Being met with kindness instead of anger, generosity instead of defensiveness, probably planted seeds that would continue growing long after he left the mountain hut. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the transformative power of unexpected responses. By meeting attempted theft with spontaneous giving, Master Ryokan created a moment of grace that had the potential to change not only the thief's immediate experience, but his entire understanding of human nature and the possibilities for positive interaction. Tonight, as you consider what you most fear losing and what you consider your greatest treasures, can you distinguish between the possessions that can be taken from you and the qualities of awareness that remain completely beyond any external threat? What would it mean to invest more energy in developing the kind of wealth that increases through sharing rather than decreases through loss? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The moon in the window represents the eternal treasures that remain available to anyone who has learned to let go of attachment while remaining open to the beauty and wonder that no thief can ever steal. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts, about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the danger of spiritual expectations and the freedom found in ordinariness. This is the tale of a seeker who nearly missed enlightenment because he was looking for something extraordinary. In the garden of a modest Zen temple, morning sunlight filters through bamboo leaves as Master Bankei tends to his vegetables with the same careful attention he brings to meditation and teaching. His movements are unhurried and precise as he pulls weeds from around the young plants, his simple work clothes indistinguishable from those of any farmer or gardener. A man seeking spiritual instruction arrives at the temple gates, his eyes bright with the intensity of someone who has traveled far in search of wisdom. He has heard remarkable stories about Master Bankei's teachings and comes with great expectations of encountering someone obviously holy, perhaps surrounded by signs of spiritual power or emanating visible light. Seeing the gardener working among the vegetables, the seeker approaches and asks respectfully, "Excuse me, good sir, could you tell me where I might find the great Master Bankei? I have journeyed many days to receive his teachings." Bankei looks up from his work, soil still clinging to his hands, and smiles warmly. "Certainly," he says, gesturing toward the temple buildings. "If you go through that door there, you will find the master." The seeker bows his thanks and follows the indicated path, eager to finally meet the renowned teacher. Inside the temple, he discovers the same man he encountered in the garden, now seated in the master's traditional teaching position. The simple gardener and the great spiritual teacher are one and the same person. Confusion and indignation flare in the seeker's mind. This cannot be right. Great masters don't do common labor. Enlightened beings surely transcend mundane activities like weeding gardens. This ordinary-looking person cannot possibly be the extraordinary teacher he has sought. "Are you mocking me?" the seeker demands, his voice tight with offense. "Come down from that seat immediately. This is blasphemy. You show no respect for the true master. How dare you pretend to be someone so revered?" Master Bankei quietly rises from the teaching seat and settles himself on the floor with the same gentle awareness he had brought to his gardening. "Well," he says, with unchanged kindness, "this has created quite a difficulty. Now you won't find a Zen master in the chair anymore. The Buddha understood that if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek is often hidden by our expectations of how it should appear. Why do we struggle to recognize wisdom when it doesn't match our preconceptions? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds create elaborate images of how spiritual advancement should look. We expect enlightened people to be somehow separate from ordinary human experience, elevated above the mundane concerns that occupy our own lives. This spiritual materialism creates a dangerous divide between sacred and secular, special and ordinary, enlightened and unenlightened. We imagine that awakening transforms people into something other than human, rather than revealing the sacred nature of humanity itself. These expectations become barriers that prevent us from recognizing the very wisdom we claim to seek. The seeker's reaction reveals how deeply our conditioning shapes perception. Unable to reconcile his image of a great master with the reality of someone pulling weeds, he chose to reject the evidence of his senses rather than question his assumptions. His spiritual seeking had become so invested in finding something extraordinary that he couldn't accept the extraordinary nature of complete ordinariness. Master Bankei's response perfectly demonstrates the difference between being someone and being present. When challenged about his identity, he simply moved from the formal teaching position to sitting on the floor, showing that true authority doesn't depend on external arrangements, but on the quality of awareness brought to each moment. This points to what Zen calls nothing special. The recognition that enlightenment isn't an addition to our basic nature, but a subtraction of the illusions that obscure it. The gardener master wasn't playing roles. He was simply present with whatever activity life required, whether pulling weeds or offering teachings. Consider how often you might miss valuable guidance because it doesn't arrive in the expected package. Perhaps wisdom speaks through your child's innocent observation, your colleague's casual comment, or your own spontaneous insight during mundane activities. How many masters do we overlook because they appear too ordinary to take seriously? The Buddha taught, "Look within. You are the Buddha." This isn't metaphorical flattery, but practical instruction. The awakened nature we seek in others already exists within our own awareness, waiting to be recognized beneath our mental elaborations about what enlightenment should look like. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck reminded her students that spiritual practice isn't about becoming someone special, but about being willing to be completely ordinary. We are not trying to have special experiences, she taught, but to realize the specialness of all experience when met with clear awareness. The greatest spiritual trap may be the belief that awakening will make us different from who we fundamentally are. This creates endless seeking for transformation rather than recognition of what's already present. True spirituality often looks remarkably like wholehearted engagement with ordinary life. Master Bankei's gardening wasn't separate from his spiritual realization, but an expression of it. Pulling weeds with complete attention is no less sacred than sitting in meditation. Teaching profound truths is no more enlightened than tending vegetables with care and presence. Tonight, as you notice your expectations about how wisdom should appear, can you remain open to recognizing it in unexpected forms? Perhaps the guidance you're seeking is already present in the most ordinary moments of your life, waiting only for the humility to receive it, without requirements about how it should look. As the Buddha said, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, disguised as nothing special at all. Let us continue on our journey with a tale of a master who discovered profound wisdom through childlike simplicity. This is the story of Great Fool, whose very name became his teaching. Yamamoto Yasuo lived as a prosperous scholar of ancient Japanese literature, respected for his expertise in classical poetry and his passionate devotion to traditional culture. Witnessing what he perceived as the decline of sacred values in his society, he wrote an impassioned book titled The Reality of the Gods, and ended his own life in protest, hoping to awaken others to what was being lost. He left behind substantial wealth and 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter, expecting his eldest son to inherit the family fortune and continue the family legacy. But the eldest son possessed a spirit that could not be contained by conventional expectations. The wealth, the social position, the scholarly reputation, none of these held any appeal for him. The young man looked at his inheritance and saw only golden chains that would bind him to a life his soul rejected. Without ceremony or explanation, he gave away everything his father had accumulated, changed his name to Great Fool, and set out to discover what lay beyond material security and social approval. At 22, this self-named fool began wandering in search of a true teacher. He had no money, no connections, no credentials, only a burning desire to understand the deepest truths of existence. After much searching, he found a Zen master who could guide him and threw himself into intensive study and practice. Within a few years of concentrated effort, he achieved the realization that had eluded him in his former life of comfort and learning. But instead of settling into the role of accomplished monk, Great Fool resumed his wandering. For more than 20 years, he traveled throughout the country, calling on various Zen masters to deepen and test his understanding. He sought not fame or position, but the continued polishing of his insight through contact with awakened beings. When he finally returned to his home province, Great Fool established himself in a humble hut. His appearance shocked those who remembered the wealthy young heir. He wore a robe made entirely of patches, survived on simple gruel, and owned only a single bowl which served every conceivable purpose. He used this one vessel for grinding bean paste, cooking his meager meals, and washing his hands and feet. To observers, he appeared to have lost everything of value. Yet Great Fool had discovered something precious that his former wealth could never have purchased. A love of pure genuineness that drew him irresistibly to children. Wherever he went, groups of children would gather around him for games of kickball and hide and seek. His delight in their company was infectious, and they responded to his presence with the natural trust that children reserve for those whose hearts are completely open. One day, during a game of hide and seek, Great Fool found his hiding place and closed his eyes, waiting to be discovered. But children being children, they eventually grew tired of the game and wandered home for dinner, completely forgetting about the monk hidden in their midst. Great Fool remained motionless in his hiding spot until nightfall, when a passerby discovered him and asked what he was doing. "I'm playing hide and seek with the children," Great Fool replied with perfect seriousness. "I'm waiting for someone to find me." The passerby explained that the children had gone home hours ago, but Great Fool showed no embarrassment at being left behind. He accepted this information with the same equanimity he brought to everything else, neither angry at the children for forgetting him, nor ashamed of his apparently foolish commitment to their game. When people asked why he spent so much time with children, Great Fool's answer was always the same. "I love their genuineness, their complete lack of falsehood." Despite his appearance of poverty and simplicity, Great Fool's calligraphy became famous throughout the region. Many wealthy patrons approached him with requests for his artistic work, offering substantial payments. But he had developed an uncanny ability to sense the motivation behind each request, accepting only when he felt the person's sincerity matched his own. Whenever children asked him to write something, anything, he would immediately take up his brush with joy, never refusing their requests regardless of how simple or seemingly meaningless. Great Fool often shared his philosophy with visitors. "There are 3 things I very much dislike: the poetry of poets, the writing of writers, and the cuisine of cooks." By this he meant that when people become overly conscious of their skills and sophisticated in their techniques, they often lose the natural spontaneity that makes their work truly alive. The Buddha understood that in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. What emerges from Great Fool's story is the profound teaching that wisdom often requires us to become foolish by the world's standards in order to rediscover what authenticity actually means. Why do we lose touch with our natural genuineness as we mature? Zen Buddhism points to the ways that social conditioning gradually teaches us to perform ourselves rather than simply being ourselves. We learn to say what others want to hear, to present images that gain approval, to suppress spontaneous responses that might seem inappropriate or unsophisticated. Great Fool's attraction to children reveals something essential about enlightened consciousness. Children haven't yet learned to edit their responses for social acceptability. They express joy when they feel joyful, curiosity when something interests them, and affection without calculation. This unfiltered authenticity represents not immaturity, but a kind of wisdom that most adults spend lifetimes trying to recover. The single bowl that served all purposes becomes a beautiful metaphor for the unified simplicity that emerges when we stop dividing life into separate compartments. When we drop the artificial distinctions between sacred and mundane, proper and improper, sophisticated and simple, we discover that one open heart can meet every situation with appropriate response. His willingness to remain hidden while the children forgot about him demonstrates what Zen calls great patience, the capacity to be fully present to whatever is happening without needing it to be different. Most adults would have felt foolish and emerged from hiding place, but Great Fool's commitment to the game was absolute. His patience wasn't passive, but actively loving, trusting that staying true to his word mattered more than avoiding awkwardness. Consider your own relationship to sophistication and social appropriateness. How much energy do you spend crafting responses that will create the right impression rather than simply expressing what's true for you? What would shift if you trusted that your genuine responses, however simple or unpolished, might actually touch others more deeply than your carefully constructed presentations? Zen master Ikkyu taught, "That stone Buddha deserves all the bird droppings it gets." This points to the same truth Great Fool embodied, that real spirituality isn't about maintaining a pure, elevated image, but about remaining genuinely present to life as it actually unfolds, messiness and all. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's interactions, can you sense where you were performing yourself versus simply being yourself? Can you feel the difference between responding from calculation and responding from the childlike genuineness that Great Fool never lost? As the Buddha taught, if we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. The miracle lies not in complexity, but in the simple, direct encounter with what's actually present, something children know naturally and adults must learn to remember. Our next story reveals a profound truth about the nature of genuine gratitude and the difference between social convention and authentic appreciation. This is the unending thank you. Master Sengai was known throughout his community for many qualities: his wisdom, his compassion, his quick wit. But he was also notorious for one peculiar habit. He never thanked people. Not once, not ever. This strange characteristic puzzled and sometimes offended those who encountered him, particularly those who went out of their way to help him. One grey, rain-soaked afternoon, as Master Sengai walked through the narrow streets near his temple, disaster struck. The leather thong of his traditional wooden geta sandals snapped, leaving him stranded on the muddy road with one foot bare and the other still elevated on the remaining sandal. He stood there momentarily, rain dripping from his robes, contemplating this minor predicament. A kind woman who ran the local tofu shop witnessed his distress from her storefront. Without hesitation, she closed her shop, hurried through the rain to the nearest vendor, purchased a replacement thong with her own money, and ran back to where the master stood waiting. Kneeling in the mud, despite her clean apron, she carefully replaced the broken thong, ensuring the sandal was secure and comfortable. Master Sengai watched this entire display of generosity in silence. When the woman finished her work and looked up expectantly, perhaps hoping for some acknowledgement of her kindness, the master simply adjusted his robes, tested the repaired sandal, and walked away without a single word of gratitude. The woman stood in the rain, bewildered and increasingly indignant. Days passed, then weeks, and whenever she encountered the master in the streets or at community gatherings, he would nod politely, but never once mentioned her act of kindness or offered the thanks she felt she deserved. Finally, her frustration boiled over. To anyone who would listen, she complained bitterly. Everyone praises Master Sengai for being such a worthy man, but he isn't anything of the sort. On that rainy day when his sandal broke and he was really in trouble, I went and bought him a new thong and replaced it myself, getting muddy and wet in the process. But he never thanked me, not then, not ever. I can't imagine a more ungrateful person. Her complaints eventually reached the ears of an acquaintance who was curious enough about this story to visit Master Sengai at the temple. "Master," he said, "there's a woman in town who's very upset because you never thanked her for helping you with your broken sandal." Sengai looked up from his tea with eyes that held both mischief and profound understanding. "When people finish saying thank you," he replied quietly, "that's the end of the matter right there. The gratitude is expressed, received, and forgotten. But I intend never to forget a kindness as long as I live." As the Buddha observed, gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between performed appreciation and living gratitude. This tale unveils a startling truth about how we typically handle kindness and appreciation in our daily lives. We have been conditioned to believe that gratitude is primarily a social transaction, a debt that must be acknowledged verbally and then considered settled. We thank the cashier, file away the interaction as complete, and move on without another thought. But what if true gratitude operates differently? What if authentic appreciation isn't something we express once and forget, but something we carry as a living awareness that continues to influence how we move through the world? Zen teachings illuminate another pattern we rarely examine: our tendency to commodify kindness. When someone helps us, we feel obligated to pay them back with thanks, gifts, or return favors. Once this social debt is settled, we consider ourselves free from any ongoing connection to their generosity. This transactional approach to kindness turns beautiful human moments into emotional commerce. We can observe this dynamic in our modern relationships. How often do we offer quick, automatic thank yous that satisfy social expectations but don't arise from genuine appreciation? How frequently do our expressions of gratitude serve more to discharge our sense of obligation than to honor the gift we received? Zen Master Dogen wrote, "Gratitude is not a mere feeling, but a way of life." This perspective transforms our understanding of appreciation from a momentary expression to a sustained state of awareness. When we truly receive someone's kindness, it becomes part of us, continuing to influence our actions and attitudes long after the initial moment passes. Consider how Master Sengai's approach might actually honor the tofu shop woman more deeply than conventional thanks ever could. By carrying her kindness as a living memory, he allows her generosity to continue rippling through his interactions with others. Every time he encounters someone in need, her example influences his response. Her single act of compassion becomes multiplied through his ongoing awareness of it. This teaching also reveals our attachment to recognition and validation. The woman's frustration wasn't really about the master's ingratitude. It was about her need to be acknowledged and appreciated in the specific way she expected. When our kindness becomes conditional on receiving particular responses, we transform generous acts into investments seeking returns. We also find ourselves confronted by the question of whether true appreciation can be adequately captured in words at all. The Japanese have a concept called mono no aware, a bittersweet awareness of the impermanent nature of things that leads to a deeper appreciation for their fleeting beauty. Perhaps Master Sengai understood that the tofu woman's kindness belonged to this realm of experiences, too profound for conventional expression. Tonight, as you recall acts of kindness you've received recently, can you sense the difference between gratitude as social obligation and gratitude as living awareness? What would it mean to carry these gifts not as debts to be discharged, but as treasures that continue to enrich your understanding of human goodness? The Buddha taught, "Let us be grateful to the people who make us happy. They are the charming gardeners who make our souls blossom." In cultivating this deeper appreciation, we discover that true gratitude is not something we give to others, but something that transforms us from within, making us more generous, more aware, and more connected to the continuous flow of kindness that moves through human life. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied. gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. and even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the traps we create through our own grasping. This teaching comes to us through the ancient wisdom of those who observed both human nature and the natural world with equal clarity. In the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, where coconut palms sway in the ocean breeze and monkeys chatter among the emerald canopy, local hunters developed an ingenious method for capturing these agile creatures. The technique required no violence, no speed, and no superior strength. Instead, it relied upon understanding a fundamental aspect of the monkey's nature that would become its undoing. The hunters would select a coconut and carefully hollow out its interior through a small opening, leaving just enough space for their trap. Into this hollow chamber, they would place a handful of sweet rice, its aroma irresistible to any hungry monkey. The opening was crafted with precise dimensions, large enough for a monkey's open hand to reach inside, but too small for a clenched fist to withdraw. When a curious monkey discovered this strange coconut attached to a tree, it would investigate by reaching inside for the rice. The moment its fingers closed around the grains, it became trapped, not by any external force, but by its own unwillingness to release what it had grasped. The monkey could have freed itself instantly simply by opening its hand and letting go of the rice. But this solution seemed impossible from within its limited perspective. The hunters would find these monkeys sitting by their traps, sometimes for hours, pulling frantically at their trapped hands while refusing to release the very thing that held them captive. The rice that had promised nourishment became the source of their captivity. Their natural intelligence, so evident in other situations, seemed to abandon them when faced with the simple choice between holding on and letting go. What made this trap so effective wasn't its physical construction but its psychological design. It transformed the monkey's own grasping nature into the mechanism of its capture. The stronger the monkey pulled, the more trapped it became. The tighter it gripped the rice, the more impossible escape appeared. The Buddha taught, "You only lose what you cling to." This profound teaching points directly to the monkey's predicament and our own. The story illuminates how our attachments, no matter how seemingly small or justified, can become the very prisons that limit our freedom. Why do we hold so tightly to things that ultimately constrain our movement through life? Buddhist psychology identifies this pattern as the root of much human suffering. Our minds, like the monkey's instincts, are conditioned to grasp what appears beneficial and hold on regardless of consequences. We close our mental fists around possessions, relationships, identities, opinions, and even spiritual experiences, believing that our security depends on our grip strength. This grasping operates across every dimension of human experience. We cling to past versions of ourselves that no longer serve our growth. We hold on to resentments that poison our present happiness. We grasp at relationships beyond their natural seasons. We clutch at achievements and possessions as if they could provide lasting security. We even grip our spiritual insights so tightly that they become obstacles to further awakening. The coconut trap reveals how what we think will nourish us can become what confines us. The rice represents all those things we convince ourselves we cannot live without. Perhaps it's a particular lifestyle, a specific role or identity, a certain level of comfort, or even an image of how our spiritual journey should unfold. Like the monkey, we often cannot see that our freedom lies in simply opening our hand. Master Huang Po taught, "Nothing is gained by addition, nothing is lost by subtraction." This points to the liberating truth that our essential nature cannot be enhanced by accumulating things or diminished by releasing them. The monkey's true nature isn't improved by possessing rice, yet its conditioning makes release feel like loss rather than relief. Consider the coconut traps in your own life. What are you gripping so tightly that it prevents you from moving freely? Perhaps it's a job that no longer brings joy, but provides familiar security. Maybe it's a grudge that feels justified but weighs down your heart. It could be an image of yourself that once served you but now constrains your evolution. The practice of letting go doesn't mean becoming passive or uncaring. It means holding our preferences lightly, like water cupped in open palms rather than ice gripped in closed fists. When we release our desperate grasp on outcomes, we often discover that what we truly need flows toward us more naturally. Zen teacher Alan Watts observed that we suffer most when we confuse our maps with the territory, our concepts about life with life itself. The monkey cannot eat the concept of rice, yet it sacrifices its freedom for the illusion of possession. Similarly, we often sacrifice our peace for mental objects that exist more in our imagination than in reality. Tonight, as you notice the various things your mind tells you that you cannot release, can you experiment with gently opening your hand? Perhaps you'll find that letting go doesn't mean losing what matters, but discovering what freedom feels like. As the Buddha reminded us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The coconut trap teaches us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to open our grasp. Now, let us explore a Zen story about flowing with natural forces and the profound wisdom of accommodation rather than resistance. This is the bamboo in the hut. Master Ryokan's mountain dwelling was as simple and humble as his lifestyle. A small hut constructed with basic materials that provided adequate shelter without any pretense to permanence or grandeur. The structure reflected his philosophy of taking only what was necessary from the natural environment while remaining open to whatever changes the seasons and elements might bring. One spring, as the earth warmed and new life stirred throughout the mountain forests, something unexpected began happening beneath the wooden floorboards of the master's hut. Tiny bamboo shoots, following their ancient genetic programming to seek light and space for growth, started emerging from the soil below his living space. Most people, discovering this situation, would have immediately seen it as a problem requiring swift action. Bamboo is notorious for its vigorous growth and its ability to damage structures. Left unchecked, the shoots would certainly push up through the floorboards, creating holes and potentially compromising the integrity of the entire building. The conventional response would have been to cut away the bamboo before it could cause structural damage. But Master Ryokan saw the situation differently. Rather than viewing the emerging bamboo as an unwelcome intrusion or a threat to his shelter, he chose to work with the natural forces at play. Without hesitation, he began tearing up sections of his floorboards to create space for the bamboo shoots to grow freely toward the light they sought. As the weeks passed, the bamboo responded to his accommodation by growing with remarkable speed and vigor. The shoots rose higher and higher, soon reaching the ceiling of the small hut and pressing against the roof beams. Again, most people would have seen this as the point where drastic action became necessary. Either the bamboo had to be cut or the dwelling would be destroyed. Once again, Master Ryokan chose accommodation over resistance. He carefully removed sections of his roof to allow the bamboo to continue its upward growth, creating openings that let the shoots emerge into the open air above his living space. The bamboo responded by growing through the roof and continuing to reach toward the sky. The final result of this process was remarkable. Master Ryokan found himself living in a hut where living bamboo grew up through the floor and extended through the roof, creating a unique dwelling that was part human construction and part natural forest. Rather than seeing this as a compromised or damaged living situation, he embraced it as an enhancement that brought him into even more intimate contact with natural processes. Untroubled by what others might consider a highly irregular living arrangement, Master Ryokan simply continued his daily practices of meditation, study, and contemplation. He sat in zazen beneath the living bamboo that now shared his dwelling space, finding that their presence added a quality of natural aliveness and seasonal awareness that conventional architecture could never provide. The bamboo became his intimate companions, growing and changing with the seasons, rustling softly in the wind, and creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted throughout the day. What had begun as a potential problem had been transformed through his willingness to accommodate natural forces into an enhancement of his simple mountain life. As the Buddha observed, nothing is permanent except change. This teaching relates profoundly to our capacity for flowing with natural processes, rather than rigidly defending our constructed plans and arrangements against the inevitable forces of growth and transformation. This ancient wisdom illuminates our typical approaches to unexpected changes in our carefully organized lives. Most of us invest tremendous energy in creating structures, physical, emotional, professional, social, that we then feel compelled to defend against any forces that might alter them. We treat change as disruption rather than opportunity, as problems to be solved rather than invitations to discover new possibilities. Master Ryokan's response to the bamboo demonstrates a radically different relationship with the unexpected. Rather than seeing the shoots as invasive problems threatening his security, he recognized them as natural expressions of life force seeking room to grow. His accommodation of their needs led to a living situation that was far more interesting and dynamic than his original static dwelling. Why do we typically resist natural processes of growth and change, even when they might lead to improvements in our circumstances? This resistance often stems from our attachment to predictability and our fear that any deviation from our plans will lead to chaos or loss of control. We prefer the security of familiar limitations to the uncertainty of organic development. The master's willingness to tear up his floorboards and modify his roof represents the kind of fundamental flexibility that authentic spiritual practice cultivates. Rather than defending his comfort zone against all modifications, he remained open to discovering what new forms of livability might emerge through cooperation with forces beyond his control. This story reveals the difference between accommodation and passive surrender. Ryokan wasn't simply accepting whatever happened without response. He was actively participating in creating solutions that honored both his need for shelter and the bamboo's need for growing space. His actions were both practical and deeply cooperative with natural processes. We can observe similar opportunities for creative accommodation in many areas of life. The parent whose carefully planned family routines are disrupted by a child's unexpected interests or needs. The business owner whose established procedures need modification to accommodate changing market conditions. The individual whose life plans are altered by unforeseen circumstances that could lead to entirely new possibilities. Zen practice cultivates what might be called adaptive wisdom, the ability to work creatively with whatever emerges, rather than rigidly defending predetermined structures against natural processes of change and growth. This requires a fundamental trust that flow and adaptation often lead to outcomes superior to our original fixed plans. The image of Master Ryokan meditating beneath living bamboo that grew through his dwelling represents a profound teaching about integration with natural rhythms. Instead of seeing his spiritual practice as something that required complete separation from natural processes, he discovered how accommodation of organic growth could enhance rather than compromise his contemplative life. This teaching also points us toward understanding the difference between problems and opportunities. The bamboo shoots initially appeared to threaten the master's shelter, but his willingness to work with them creatively transformed potential destruction into unusual enhancement. Our capacity to see challenges as invitations for creative response often determines whether difficulties become sources of growth or simply sources of stress. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual practice requires completely controlled environments free from unexpected intrusions. Master Ryokan's story suggests that authentic practice might actually be strengthened by learning to maintain inner peace while accommodating whatever natural forces emerge in our immediate environment. The story reveals how often our concepts of proper order and appropriate boundaries can blind us to possibilities for richer, more integrated ways of living. The master's hut, with bamboo growing through it, challenged conventional ideas about indoor and outdoor spaces, but created a unique form of dwelling that honored both human needs and natural processes. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the creativity that can emerge when we stop fighting against what wants to happen and instead ask how we might work with emerging forces to create something neither we nor they could have achieved independently. Tonight, as you consider areas of your life where unexpected changes or growth are challenging your established routines and structures, can you identify opportunities for creative accommodation rather than rigid resistance? What would it mean to tear up a few floorboards to make room for natural processes that might enhance rather than threaten your overall well-being. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the wise find pleasure in water, virtue in mountains, and wisdom in forests. By learning to live in harmony with natural forces, rather than constant opposition to them, we discover forms of security and satisfaction that rigid control can never provide. The deep peace that comes from flowing with life, rather than constantly struggling against it. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walks slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
"This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real."
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. and our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Let us explore a story about the difference between true compassion and religious display. This is the temple gate. In ancient Japan, there lived a wealthy merchant named Heizayamon, whose heart overflowed with genuine concern for human suffering. Unlike many men of wealth who hoarded their fortunes, he spent his days seeking out opportunities to ease the pain of others. When winter brought hunger to poor families, Heizayamon ensured their children had rice. When floods washed away bridges, he funded their reconstruction. When illness struck the elderly with no one to care for them, his resources provided medicine and comfort. His generosity was not the calculated charity of one seeking public recognition, but the natural response of a heart that could not bear to witness suffering. Villagers throughout the province knew his kindness, and his reputation for selfless benevolence spread far beyond his hometown. Even in his final will, Heizayamon directed that his wealth continue serving those in need long after his death, a legacy his children honored faithfully. One autumn morning, a Buddhist friar appeared at Heizayamon's door. The monk's robes were fine, his manner polished, and his request carefully rehearsed. "Honorable sir," the friar began with elaborate bows, "I have heard of your magnificent charitable works. Our temple requires a grand gate to properly welcome worshippers and display our devotion to the Buddha. Such a structure would bring great merit to your name and ensure your place in paradise." Heizayamon listened quietly, studying the monk's earnest face. When the friar finished his eloquent appeal, the merchant began to laugh, not mockingly, but with the gentle amusement of one who sees clearly through pretense. "Venerable monk," he replied, "I help people because I cannot bear to see them suffer. Tell me, what suffering does a temple without a gate endure? What pain does an absent gate cause the Buddha?" The friar sputtered, unprepared for such directness. "But sir, a temple gate shows respect, demonstrates our prosperity, attracts more followers." "Ah," said Heizayamon, still smiling. "So this gate would serve the temple's image, not reduce anyone's suffering. When children go hungry, while monks seek ornamental gates, which serves the Buddha's teachings better, feeding the children or building the gate?" The monk departed empty-handed, perhaps carrying with him a lesson more valuable than any donation. The Buddha once said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with wrongful deeds." This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between authentic compassion and spiritual theater. True service to others flows naturally from understanding our interconnectedness, while religious display often serves only our ego's desire for recognition and status. Why do we sometimes confuse religious ceremony with spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that lead us astray from genuine compassion. We often become attached to the forms of spirituality rather than its essence. Like the monk seeking a gate, we can become so focused on the external symbols of devotion that we lose sight of their purpose. A beautiful temple may inspire reverence, but it serves little purpose if our hearts remain closed to suffering around us. We also fall into the trap of performative spirituality, practicing religion to be seen as religious, rather than to reduce suffering and cultivate wisdom. This might manifest as elaborate rituals while ignoring simple acts of kindness, or seeking recognition for charitable donations while remaining blind to daily opportunities for compassion. Additionally, our minds often complicate what is simple. The Buddha's teachings point toward reducing suffering, yet we create elaborate theological structures that can obscure this fundamental truth. Like building ornate gates while children starve, We sometimes invest in spiritual complexity while overlooking basic human needs right before us. Consider how this pattern appears in modern life. We might donate to distant charities while remaining indifferent to our neighbors' struggles. We may attend religious services weekly while treating service workers harshly. We could meditate for hours while speaking unkindly to family members. These contradictions reveal how easily we separate spiritual practice from compassionate action. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." When we approach spirituality with a beginner's mind, we see suffering clearly and respond naturally. When we become experts in religious forms, we might lose sight of their purpose entirely. The heart of this teaching lies in recognizing that authentic spiritual practice always serves love and reduces suffering. Any religious activity that increases separation, judgment, or self-importance moves us away from the Buddha's path, regardless of how traditional or elaborate it may be. This doesn't mean religious ceremonies lack value, but rather that their worth lies in how they open our hearts and inspire compassionate action. A temple gate serves the Buddha when it welcomes all beings equally, not when it displays the temple's wealth, while others go without basic needs. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." When our spiritual practices increase our capacity for love and decrease our tendency toward judgment, they serve their true purpose. When they become opportunities for display or self-aggrandizement, they move us away from awakening. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual practices, can you discern between actions that truly serve compassion and those that might serve your ego? Where in your life might you be building ornamental gates while overlooking genuine opportunities to reduce suffering? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to honor authentic values even when offered attractive alternatives. This is the story of the philosopher Chuang-Tzu and his encounter with worldly temptation. Beside the banks of a gentle river, where clear water flows over smooth stones and willows trail their branches in the current, the great Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu sits in quiet contemplation. The afternoon sun warms his simple robes as he watches the water's endless movement, finding in its ceaseless flow a reflection of the Tao's constant becoming. His mind rests in the natural rhythm of the moment, unencumbered by ambition or the need to be anywhere other than exactly where he is. The peaceful scene is interrupted by the approach of an elaborately dressed official whose silk garments and formal bearing announce his connection to the royal court. This representative of the prince has traveled far to find the renowned philosopher, carrying with him an offer that most people would consider the opportunity of a lifetime. "Master Chuang-Tzu," the official begins with respectful ceremony, "His Royal Highness has heard of your great wisdom and wishes to invite you to serve as an advisor in his court. You would be offered a position of tremendous influence, surrounded by luxury, honored by the kingdom's most educated citizens. Your insights would shape important decisions affecting thousands of people. This is a rare privilege that comes to very few." Chuang-Tzu continues watching the river as if he hasn't heard the magnificent offer. The water continues its ancient conversation with the stones, completely indifferent to human ambitions and social hierarchies. Fish move in the depths according to their own purposes, neither seeking advancement nor fearing obscurity. After a long silence, during which the official begins to wonder if the sage is perhaps deaf or lost in meditation too deep for interruption. Chuang Tzu speaks thoughtfully. "I have heard," he says, still gazing at the flowing water, "that the prince possesses a sacred turtle shell, one that is 2,000 years old. This treasure is kept in the palace, carefully wrapped in the finest silk and precious brocades, housed in an ornate box, and honored as one of the kingdom's most valuable relics." The official nods eagerly, pleased that the conversation seems to be moving toward acceptance of the court position. "Yes, that is perfectly true. The sacred turtle is indeed among our most prized possessions, treated with the reverence due to such an ancient and spiritually significant object." Chuang Tzu turns his attention from the river to look directly at the court representative. "Tell me," he asks with genuine curiosity, "if that turtle could choose its fate, what do you think it would prefer? To be dead and honored in the palace, wrapped in silk and venerated for its shell, or to be alive in this mud, dragging its tail behind it as it moves freely through its natural habitat?" The official considers this strange question seriously. Despite its oddness, the answer seems obvious. Well, naturally, it would prefer to be alive and free in the mud rather than dead and honored in the palace, no matter how great the reverence shown to its remains. Chuang Tzu smiles with gentle finality. "I, too, prefer to drag my tail in the mud. Good day to you, honored sir." The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." This ancient wisdom illuminates the choice between authentic expression and attractive performance that confronts everyone seeking to live with integrity. Why do we sometimes feel torn between opportunities that promise external validation and paths that honor our inner truth? Buddhist psychology reveals that the ego constructs elaborate fantasies about how recognition, status, and influence will fulfill our deepest needs. These fantasies can become so compelling that we lose touch with what actually nourishes our spirit. Chuang Tzu's response demonstrates what Taoists call following the natural way, making choices based on authentic nature rather than conditioned desires for advancement. His life beside the river, contemplating the Tao through direct observation of natural processes, provided exactly the kind of engagement that suited his temperament and purpose. The court position represented everything our achievement-oriented culture teaches us to value: prestige, influence, comfort, and social recognition. Yet the sage recognized that accepting such a role would require him to become someone fundamentally different from who he was, essentially dying to his authentic self in order to be honored as something else. This story speaks directly to anyone who has faced pressure to pursue opportunities that feel misaligned with their deeper calling. Perhaps it's a career advancement that would require compromising personal values. Maybe it's a social circle that offers status but demands constant performance. Possibly it's a lifestyle that provides security but stifles creative expression. The turtle metaphor reveals the hidden cost of pursuing external validation at the expense of authentic living. We can become so invested in how others perceive our achievements that we lose connection with our own experience of aliveness. The honored turtle shell represents any success that requires us to sacrifice our essential vitality. Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah often reminded his students that true happiness comes from reducing desires rather than fulfilling them. We suffer, he taught, not because we don't have enough, but because we want too much. Chuang-Tzu's contentment beside the river embodied this principle perfectly. The sage's choice also illustrates profound trust in what Taoists call Wu Wei, action in harmony with natural flow rather than forced effort toward predetermined goals. His life unfolded according to organic rhythms rather than strategic planning, allowing him to respond spontaneously to each moment's authentic requirements. This doesn't mean we should reject all opportunities for growth or service, but rather that we should evaluate them based on whether they allow our authentic nature to express itself more fully. Some people are genuinely called to positions of influence and responsibility. Others serve life most effectively through quieter, less visible contributions. The deeper teaching here concerns the difference between following external expectations and honoring internal guidance. Our consumer culture constantly suggests that happiness lies in acquiring more status, more recognition, more influence, more stuff. But wisdom traditions consistently point toward contentment arising from alignment with our true nature. Master Linji taught his students to become people of no rank, those who don't define themselves through social positions, but through the quality of presence they bring to each moment. This freedom from needing to be somebody special, paradoxically, allows our genuine gifts to emerge more naturally. Chuang-Tzu's riverside contemplation represents any activity that connects us with sources of meaning deeper than social validation. For some, this might be artistic expression, spending time in nature, or simple acts of service. For others, it could be raising children, building things with their hands, or engaging in spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various opportunities and pressures in your own life, can you distinguish between what your ego thinks you should want and what your deeper wisdom actually values? Perhaps you'll discover that the most fulfilling path involves trusting your authentic nature rather than pursuing what others believe will make you happy. As the Buddha taught, your work is to discover your work, and then with all your heart to give yourself to it. Sometimes our true work looks remarkably like dragging our tail in the mud, and sometimes that's exactly where we belong. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of presence and the boundaries we create between availability and solitude. This is Out Today. Master Sengai had developed an unusual habit that both puzzled and amused his community. On certain days, without any apparent pattern or warning, he would close the wooden gate to his temple quarters and paste upon it a simple handwritten sign that read, "Out Today." Yet anyone passing by could clearly see him through the spaces in the fence, walking peacefully back and forth in his front garden, tending to his plants, sitting in meditation, or simply enjoying the afternoon sunshine. The master made no effort to hide his presence. He moved about his daily activities with complete naturalness, watering flowers, sweeping leaves, or reading beneath his favorite tree. To any observer, he was obviously at home and available, making the sign's message seem like either a joke or a contradiction. One afternoon, a samurai official who had long been acquainted with the master happened to pass by the temple. Noticing Sengai clearly visible in his garden, the official approached the gate with a friendly smile and called out, "Your Reverence, I haven't seen you in some time. How have you been? I was hoping we might have a conversation." Master Sengai looked up from the chrysanthemums he was arranging and simply pointed to the sign posted prominently on his gate. "Please read what it says," he replied matter-of-factly. The samurai, increasingly confused, gestured toward the master with obvious bewilderment. "But Your Reverence, you're clearly here, aren't you? I can see you right there in front of me. You must just be kidding around. Sengai dismissed him with a gentle wave of his hand, his expression remaining perfectly serious. That sign says I'm out. It's as true as anything can be. And with that declaration, he turned his attention back to his flowers, refusing any further conversation. The samurai stood at the gate for several more minutes, watching the master continue his gardening, trying to comprehend this strange interaction. Finally, shaking his head in confusion, he departed, leaving Master Sengai to his peculiar form of absence. As the Buddha understood, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This teaching relates profoundly to our modern struggle with the boundaries between availability and inner sanctuary, between social obligation and spiritual necessity. Why do we find it so difficult to establish clear boundaries around our inner availability, even when we are physically present? This story unveils our complex relationship with accessibility and the guilt we often feel about not being constantly available to others' needs and expectations. In our hyper-connected world, the pressure to be perpetually accessible has become overwhelming. Our phones buzz with constant demands for attention. Our email inboxes fill with urgent requests. Social media creates an expectation of immediate response and continuous engagement. We have lost the ancient wisdom of knowing when to be present and when to be out, regardless of our physical location. Master Sengai understood something profound about the nature of true availability. Being physically present doesn't automatically mean being internally available for meaningful interaction. Sometimes we need to be out from social engagement in order to be fully in with our inner work, our spiritual practice, or simply the restoration of our authentic self. This teaching also reveals our tendency to confuse physical presence with emotional or spiritual accessibility. How often do we assume that because someone is visible, they should automatically be available for our needs? How frequently do we ignore others' subtle signals that they need space simply because they haven't erected obvious barriers? Zen Master Yunmen taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is appropriate for the same activities or interactions. Some days are good for engagement, others for solitude. Some moments call for availability, others for protective boundaries. Wisdom lies in recognizing which is needed when. We can observe this dynamic in countless modern situations. The parent who loves their children deeply but recognizes they need an hour of uninterrupted quiet time to remain emotionally available later. The artist who must protect their creative space from well-meaning friends who don't understand the delicate nature of inspiration. The spiritual practitioner who needs to establish boundaries around their meditation time, even if others consider it selfish or antisocial. The samurai's confusion reflects our cultural discomfort with boundaries that aren't immediately logical or convenient for others. We want people's availability to match our schedules and needs, rather than their own inner rhythms and requirements. When someone establishes a boundary that doesn't make sense to us, we often assume they're being arbitrary, unfriendly, or deceptive. This ancient wisdom illuminates another important distinction: the difference between isolation and conscious solitude. Master Sengai wasn't hiding from life or avoiding responsibility. He was claiming his right to be present with himself, to engage with his immediate environment, without the overlay of social interaction and conversation. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that availability is a moral obligation rather than a conscious choice. We feel guilty for not being constantly accessible, as if our worth depends on our willingness to interrupt our own needs for others' convenience. This creates a pattern of resentment and depletion that ultimately makes us less genuinely available when authentic connection is possible. The story also points us toward understanding the power of clear, simple boundaries. Master Sengai didn't offer elaborate explanations or justifications for his unavailability. He didn't apologize or make excuses. He simply stated a fact. Today he was out from social engagement, and this was as true and valid as any other truth. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with availability and boundaries, can you identify times when you might need to be out, even while physically present? What would it mean to honor your inner rhythms of engagement and solitude without guilt or extensive justification? The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Part of this self-love involves knowing when to be available to others and when to be available to yourself, trusting that both forms of presence serve the greater good. Let us now turn to a story about the misconceptions that can arise around spiritual practice and the true nature of awakening. This is the teaching of the tile and the mirror. In the quiet meditation hall of an ancient monastery, a dedicated student sits in perfect stillness. His posture is impeccable, his breathing regulated, his concentration focused with laser-like intensity. For hours each day, he maintains this practice, convinced that through sheer determination and disciplined effort, he will achieve the ultimate goal of his spiritual seeking, to become a Buddha. The young monk's devotion is unquestionable. He rises before dawn, sits through the discomfort of aching legs and restless mind, and returns to his cushion again and again with unwavering commitment. In his understanding, meditation is the direct path to enlightenment, and sufficient hours of practice will inevitably produce the transformation he seeks. His Zen master observes this intense effort with interest. One afternoon, as the student enters another deep meditation session, the master quietly takes a ceramic roof tile and begins scraping it rhythmically against a large stone. The sound is persistent and somewhat jarring in the peaceful atmosphere of the temple grounds. For some time, the student tries to maintain his concentration despite the distraction. But as the scraping continues, curiosity eventually overcomes his meditative discipline. Opening his eyes, he watches his master working with apparent purpose, moving the tile against the stone with steady, repetitive motions. Unable to contain his puzzlement any longer, the student speaks respectfully. "Master, forgive my interruption, but may I ask what you are doing with that tile?" The Zen master looks up from his work with complete seriousness and replies, "I am polishing this tile until it becomes a mirror." The student stares in bewilderment. "But master, surely you know that no amount of polishing can transform a tile into a mirror. They are fundamentally different materials with entirely different properties. This seems impossible." The master nods thoughtfully and sets down the tile. "Indeed," he says, looking directly at his student, "how can you become a Buddha through meditation? If you are not already Buddha nature, no amount of sitting will create what isn't there." The Buddha taught, "Look within. You are the Buddha." This tale unveils the fundamental misconception about spiritual practice that treats awakening as an acquisition rather than a recognition. Why do we approach spiritual development as if consciousness can be manufactured through technique? Buddhist psychology explains that this gaining mind reflects our deepest conditioning about how things work in the material world. We assume that sufficient effort applied to spiritual practices will produce enlightenment, just as sufficient study produces knowledge or sufficient training produces skills. This mechanical approach to awakening creates what Zen calls practice enlightenment, confusion. We imagine that meditation, like polishing, will gradually transform our ordinary consciousness into something extraordinary. The harder we polish, the more enlightened we should become. The longer we sit, the closer we should move towards some future attainment. The master's demonstration reveals the absurdity of this approach. A tile's essential nature cannot be changed through external action, only its surface appearance. Similarly, our Buddha nature cannot be created through practice, because it's already the foundation of our being. Meditation doesn't manufacture awakening. At best, it removes the obstacles that obscure our recognition of what's already present. This doesn't diminish the value of meditation, but clarifies its purpose. Sitting practice isn't about becoming someone different, but about discovering who we've always been beneath our mental elaborations. It's not transformation, but revelation. Not acquisition, but recognition. Master Dogen taught that practice and enlightenment are one seamless reality. We don't sit in order to become enlightened. Sitting itself is the expression of our enlightened nature when we're not trying to get somewhere else. This subtle shift from doing meditation to being meditation transforms the entire enterprise. Consider how this understanding might change your relationship to spiritual practice. Instead of working towards some future achievement, you're exploring the nature of consciousness itself right now. Instead of accumulating spiritual experiences, you're investigating what's experiencing everything. Instead of becoming enlightened, you're discovering how awareness appears to itself in this moment. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." When we think awakening is something to be achieved, we become achievers. When we recognize it as our natural state temporarily obscured, we become relaxed explorers of our own awareness. This recognition extends beyond formal meditation into everyday activities. Washing dishes isn't preparation for enlightenment. It's enlightenment expressing itself as dishwashing when done with complete presence. Working, walking, talking, and resting all become opportunities for awareness to recognize itself, rather than stepping stones towards some distant realization. Zen Master Bankei taught about the unborn mind that's already awake and doesn't need improvement. When you're angry, he would say, anger is being angry. When you're peaceful, peace is being peaceful. The unborn awareness that knows these states never becomes any of them and needs no fixing. The student in our story represents everyone who has confused spiritual effort with spiritual attainment. His dedication was admirable, but his understanding created unnecessarily complicated relationships with natural awareness. Enlightenment isn't earned through accumulated sitting time, but recognized through clear seeing. This doesn't encourage spiritual laziness, but points toward effortless effort. The kind of practice that emerges when we stop trying to get somewhere and start exploring where we already are. Paradoxically, this often leads to deeper and more consistent engagement with formal practice. The tile polishing also represents any spiritual technique that emphasizes gradual development over direct recognition. While practices can be beneficial for developing stability and concentration, they become obstacles when treated as enlightenment manufacturing processes. Tonight, as you settle into whatever forms of spiritual practice call to you, can you experiment with the difference between doing practice and being practice? Perhaps you'll discover that the very awareness you're trying to develop through technique is already timelessly present, simply waiting to be noticed. As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The peace you seek through polishing tiles is already the nature of the awareness that seeks it. Tonight, as we reach the close of our journey together, notice how beautifully settled your mind has become. This profound mental relaxation you're experiencing has always lived within you, simply waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Buddha taught us, the mind is like water. When agitated, it becomes difficult to see. When calm, everything becomes clear. Each gentle tale tonight has helped soothe your restless thoughts and revealed something beautifully simple. True peace doesn't require mastering your circumstances. It only asks that you soften your grip a little. These 25 gentle Buddhist tales have all illuminated the same essential wisdom. Mental relaxation flows naturally when you stop wrestling with your thoughts, and understanding dawns when you release the need to solve everything. Tonight's ancient teachings are already weaving themselves into your consciousness, working their quiet magic even now. When tomorrow brings its familiar rush and your thoughts begin to spiral, return to this serene state you've discovered. The tranquility you've cultivated tonight remains eternally accessible, ready to embrace you whenever you call upon it. There's no need to memorize every teaching or dissect each lesson. Simply trust that something profound has awakened within you. These aren't merely old wisdom stories we've explored together. They're living invitations, showing you that deep mental relaxation is always within reach, regardless of life's external turbulence. Tonight's insights will continue to nurture you, silently inspiring more moments of this beautiful stillness. As sleep begins to welcome you, rest in knowing you possess everything necessary to rediscover this gentle serenity whenever you choose. There's no complexity or mystery involved. It's as effortless as drawing breath and recognizing that all is well, here in this precious moment. Sleep peacefully, and thank you for sharing this journey with us at Sleepy Monk.